7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hit it! Hit it!
How can I hit it? He's still not visualizing.
Jump them.
What, the timelines? You can't do it blind.
I'll say what we can and can't do. Or anything expect them to stay here. Ignition!
We have liftoff.
Scanning for audio.
Welcome once again to the Tin Dog Podcast. As you can hear, my voice is a little better than last time. Thanks for the emails, hoping that I'll get better. Quite clearly, I have. As promised, I'm going to be covering Warriors Gate this time. Warriors Gate is the last part of the E-Space trilogy, and marks the departure of K9 and Romana. It's also extremely close to the end of Tom Baker's time, and it also marks the changeover from science fantasy to more hard-bitten science fiction. That is one of the trademarks of the Davison era. This story is an odd thing, because it isn't as well accepted or as well beloved as many of the stories that surround it. Saying that, I'm not saying it's a bad story at all. The people who love this story truly, truly love it, and will defend it within an inch of their lives. But a lot of people just don't really like it.
Well, go on then. Admit it. You don't know what you're doing.
I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just following intuition.
It's no better than tossing a coin.
What's so improbable about tossing a coin?
When this story was first on TV, I was 9. And I was, you can probably guess, quite a big Doctor Who fan. I was also quite a big fan of K9, and still am, hence the name of the podcast. And I was aware that K9 was leaving. No, I'm not sure completely if I was aware that K9 and Company was on the horizon, but it just wouldn't be the same. The K9 without the Doctor? Good Lord. And so this story didn't really become my favourite because it marked the end of an era. I also didn't like the design. You have to remember I'm talking about me aged 9. I thought that setting any story in a large white void was just, well, a cheap get-out. I understand now that it had narrative importance. But for me, age 9, I was just thinking, oh look, they're wandering round, and it's white. I want to see strange alien worlds. I want to see something exciting. Not just a room covered in cobwebs and some white on white on white. Of course, I'm no longer 8 or 9. I'm now considerably older and can look on this story with a fresh pair of eyes. Of course, I'd seen it in the intervening years. I'd seen it on UK Gold and the like. I even bought the lovely VHS slidey box set, which I'm sure I should put on eBay at some point, but I suspect it's a little bit too late to sell on now. So, fighting down the thoughts and disappointment of the 9-year-old, I watched this again with fresh eyes, and I found it much better than I remembered it. Of course, the 20-something who'd watched it on VHS also enjoyed the show, but again, not as much as he could have. I remember thinking back, wondering that I wasn't quite sure what was going on. I mean, I'm a guy who thinks he understands Ghostlight, so I shouldn't really have a problem with a story like this, but I did. I didn't quite grasp who the Tharals were, what the privateer ship was doing there in the first place. And so I watched it, let the story wash over me and just ignored it because I had some Pertwees I could be getting on with watching instead. And that was fine. But now I've watched it, now I grasp it, and now I get what everyone was talking about. I get why lots of people like this story. All 3 parts of the E-Space trilogy have crashed spaceships in them. The Liner, the Hydrax, and the Privateer. I'd never really noticed that until I finally sat down to review it for the TDP. But all 3 treatments of the crashed spaceship storyline are very, very different, and none more so than this story. While trying to escape from the fuzzy greenness that is E-Space, the TARDIS eventually ends up in what seems to be an area of space that is neither E-Space nor N-Space. It's a sort of gateway between the two, and that's why it is white, that's why it's a void, because it doesn't exist in any true space. The natural inhabitants of this area, or rather the people who had used this area in the past, were called Tharals, and more about those in a moment. But also trapped in this area is another spaceship called the Privateer. Most of the action in this story takes place on the Privateer with the crew of the Privateer in question. And it is this point that I really need to mention Stephen Gallagher. Stephen Gallagher was the person who originally wrote the story that this script's based on. I met Stephen Gallagher at a talk he once did about his horror writing, and he talked a little bit about his time on Doctor Who and the writing of Warrior's Gate. The extras on the DVD say exactly the same thing. Basically, he worked very hard producing an extremely detailed script, which was basically a novel in script form. This storyline was then taken and reworked on by the director and again Bidmead. The amount of work that Christopher H. Bidmead has put in to this boxed set, to the stories linked with this, really show you how much work goes into being a script editor and how much rewriting goes on in order to make all the narratives fit together. The original storyline that fitted into this slot in the season dealt with a TARDIS landing on top of itself and was actually a multi-Doctor story, if some of the notes are to be believed. Now, that's fascinating because it's a multi-Doctor story I had no idea existed. Of course, it only exists in treatment form, but that's just one of the examples of how this story had a very difficult birth. Slightly more famous are the issues that the director himself had while making the story. In studio-bound stories, which this is, the director was usually using the same sort of camera and the same sort of studio that was used to record sitcoms. Large, trundling cameras. And this director was slightly more experimental, more filmic than the BBC were used to dealing with. The designs for the set meant that he was allowed to shoot off-set, because the spaceship interior was all girders and rigging, and it would allow you to see the walls of the building where the film was being set, because that was also steel girders and rigging. The unions weren't happy about this, and the director was actually sacked for several hours. They also managed to track down one of the tiny handheld cameras, all of these things adding up to making this a rather difficult shoot. The cast didn't really understand what was happening, and to be fair, many fans feel the same way. But this story was made, it was finished, and the finished result is a little bit of a gem. As well as dealing with the storyline to do with slavers and revenge and repentance, there's also a very spiritual side to this story, or more a holistic view of the universe. Now, admittedly, as the 9-year-old, this went completely over my head. The 20-year-old, I kind of give it a nod, and the age I am now, well, I actually paid attention. But you can forgive the 9-year-old for not paying that much heed to what was going on when K9 says something like,
Hexagram 9, Xiao Shu, the taming power of the small. Quote, if you are sincere, blood vanishes and fear gives way.
It's very easy just to go, you are, and then wait for the monsters to come. And there are no real monsters in this story, and I think that is what is good about it. There are characters who are bored, there are characters who are a bit too intense, and the characters who have been monsters in the past, and that all gives a lovely characterisation feel to everything. On the commentary on this disc, we have Lalla Ward, the director, Christopher H. Bidmead again, and my personal hero, Matt Irvine, all talking about this story from their own points of view. Admittedly, there are times when they don't take it as seriously as they could, but that's fine. Matt always was just too much of a geek for his own good, but that's a good thing. Never let it be said it's a bad. And we get to talk about K9. Of course, Mr. Leeson's also on this, talking about his role, and the way that he came back just for the final few stories. It's rather nice to note that Matt was actually controlling K9 in this story, rather than the usual K9 operator, because Matt had controlled him in his very first story, giving a whole full circle feel to it. Of course, we're not talking full circle, we're talking Warrior's Gate, but leave it there. Yeah, there are things that don't make much sense. The hexagram nonsense. The idea of the Tharals looking a bit like lions, but not really. Where did the Tharals get captured? Where was going on? Why is the spaceship made of dwarf star alloy? And a load of other things. But if you don't think about it too much, this is a great story.
But what are you?
The shadow of my past and of your future.
Before I move on, here's a quick word from the rather prolific Dave A.C.
Hi, this is Dave AC. Yes, I know. You hear me on all these different podcasts. Well, now it's different. I have a video podcast. Yes, once a week I do a podcast on Blip TV. DaveAC.blip.tv. I still talk Doctor Who. I still talk about science fiction. But added to that, I talk about classical music, AV gadgets, and I even taste a wine at the end of it. Catch me once a week from the Blip TV site. I'll subscribe via iTunes. So this is Dave AC. Hoping to catch you later. Bye.
Right, before I move on to the Big Finish reviews, I think it's time for a little bit of Whostrology. Merlin McCarley sent me an email with his entire household's information, and so I shall begin with Vivienne. That's the wife. That's what he calls her rather than me. Now, she was born on August the 5th, 1964, which is, of course, the gap between The Censorites Episode 6 and Reign of Terror Episode 1. Here's her reading. Who'd have thought that there could be something in the water? Open up the parts of your mind to a crackerjack of possibilities. Be careful where you stand. Walking in another's shoes may be harder than you think. An unreasonable urge to leave your friends is interrupted by life and the French. There is nothing like a bickering firing squad to help you figure out if you are with us or against us. And I hope that makes a lot of sense. And now Merlin himself. That's January the 21st, 1968. Enemy of the World, Episode 5. You are not James Bond, and should avoid trying to live that specific dream until it's due. Be true to yourself on your motivations, even if you do have a curious accent. Beware the man who talks of sightless worms. You must not fall behind. Some people may lie to you. Ask yourself, why not me? Following on from that, we have Gawain. That's his son. Now this is from December the 30th, 1997. A tricky one, but he was born between the BBC books, Alien Bodies, and Curaçao. The artifact you seek is closer than you think. Beware of people pretending to be close family, as they want to mess with your friend's head. Some viruses are nastier than others, and it is a good idea to look under the surface before you start building something wonderful. A wolf may know better than you do. And finally, Morgaine, Merlin's daughter, January the 17th, 2002, which places her between The One Doctor, Big Finish, and Invaders from Mars. You are not the next Doctor, but you are still more fun than people think. Be wary of a voice on the radio. Sometimes you make deliberate mistakes that others will think are simply an error. Stick to your guns, and things will turn out for the best. Well, I hope that was very enlightening to everyone involved. When we looked at some Big Finish CDs, I thought we'd continue that with two really nice linked stories. Now, we all remember the Tom Baker series that was based around the Key to Time. 6 stories, all designed to find an individual part of a fabled object called the Key to Time. The Key to Time is a perfect cube that, when assembled, can control space and time. Such a time was needed when things were needed to be put right or some such made-up nonsense. And so they set out, Tom and the first Romana, to find all 6 pieces, assemble them, save the universe and move on. It was just a linking narrative. It was a MacGuffin, a trick from the production crew in order to provide some sort of linking story arc. Of course, nobody used words like story arc in those days, but you know what I mean. One of the laws of narratives is that you give the audience what they're expecting and what they want, but not necessarily how they were expecting it. An extremely good example of this happens at the end of Part 6, where the Key to Time is assembled, but not quite as you imagine it. I don't want to spoil things for anyone who hasn't seen the Key to Time, and I would recommend anyone nips out and tries to track it down. It was available on a limited run DVD some time ago, and you sometimes come across copies of it on Amazon or eBay. More likely you might find it repeated on some PBS station in America, or even more likely on something like UK Drama or UK Gold in this country. Usually about 4 in the morning. The Key to Time series with Tom is a classic. Most fans think it's the peak of Tom's time, or at very least, they hold it in extremely high regard. So when Big Finish decide to take on the Key to Time again, here using the 5th Doctor to reassemble all 6 segments, the benchmark has already been set very high. As a rule, most people assume you get 12 releases from Big Finish per year. You actually get a lot more than that. Spin-off series like the Companion Chronicles allow tales of a more literary nature to be performed by 1 or perhaps 2 members of a cast, whereas things like last week's discussion on the Unbound series allows other spin-off series. Of course, Big Finish are also producing other shows, things like the new Robin Hood series that they'll be able to release, or the much-lauded Phantom of the Opera, which was released last year, adaptations of classic stories. There's some great stuff out there by them, and the Judge Dredd series, just to name a few. But getting back to Doctor Who, as we assume that there are 12 stories per year with the main Doctors, that kind of limits things a bit, and so we've got 3 stories here dealing with the collection of 6 segments. I say 3 stories, but what I actually mean is 4, because the 4th story, story number 0 in the trilogy, if you don't mind me calling it that, is called The Prisoner's Dilemma, and it exists separately from the other trilogy because it's part of a different series. It's part of the Companion Chronicles. Some people might see that as a bit of a con, tricking you into buying the Companion Chronicles. But if that is a con, or at least a marketing move, it's a very clever one, because buying this Companion Chronicle really won't leave you disappointed. Part 0 consists of a narrative that runs parallel, or at least slightly before, Part 1 of the Key to Time, which I'm going to discuss in a moment, and is called The Prisoner's Dilemma, and it is a Companion Chronicle, a Sophie Aldred story. Sophie Aldred and Zara, that's one of the characters from the Key to Time series. They both share the narrative, and you see them both first person all the way through this story. It's very well written, very, very well performed. Sophie manages to pull off some great moments, and the actress playing Zara, again, very good. This story also has an appearance of the 7th Doctor, but doesn't actually have the 7th Doctor in it, because you're hearing it from somebody else's point of view, which is fine. And of course, with it being the 7th Doctor appearing, that means the 7th, more manipulative Doctor is already aware of what's happening, because the story of the Key to Time has happened to the 5th Doctor. Again, that makes it separate from the rest of the Key to Time trilogy. So what's the story actually about? Well, Ace and Zara are locked in a cell, and it's why they are there. It's a very simple setup to a reasonably complicated narrative. It will keep your interest, but if you are more into the acted out full narrative storylines, then perhaps this isn't for you. You don't need to have heard it in order to move on to the next part of the Key to Time series. So in effect, this is a trilogy of 4 parts. Part 0 being The Prisoner's Dilemma. Here's its trailer.
Hear me? I'm not telling you anything until I get a lawyer. All right, don't have to be so rough. I'm a girl. You understand that? A girl.
Your trial will be in hours 3.45 approx.
What? Don't I get a telephone call or a glass of water? Great. Oh, hello. Hello. Oh, ow. They knock you around too. Hey, I'm Ace. What's your name? Don't have one. All right, whatever you like. No names.
If I had one, you might use it against me.
I might, yeah. Look, I can tell you want to be left on your own, and I've got places I could be. So what's the best way out of here?
If you try to escape, you forfeit your right to a trial.
Done this before, have you?
No. I don't think so. But...
What? You can tell me. I can't use it against you.
Well, it's just... How would I know if I had done this before? You know what they do at the trials? When they find you guilty?
Tell you not to do it again?
They take your memories, wipe you clean and send you on your way.
Following on, chronologically speaking for Zara, is part 1 of The Key to Time. Now it's written Key and the number 2, Time, as opposed to the original Key to Time, which wasn't, if you see what I mean. Of course you see what I mean. And here we have Peter Davison's 5th Doctor, in a story called The Judgment of Istar, which could quite easily really be called Genesis of the Ice Warriors, because if you approach it in that way, it's actually extremely good. The narrative opens fairly simply. The Fifth Doctor is on a planet, looking through the wreckage of a ship, when he's approached by a stranger, who will eventually be called Amy. Amy has been sent by the designers of the Key to Time to track down 3 segments of the Key to Time. She also has what we shall call a sister, who is also trying to track down the Key to Time, another 3 segments to allow balance. She's been told that, for ease, it's best if she avoids seeing the Doctor because he is a little bit of a rogue element when it comes to tracking down the Key to Time. She's also been told to avoid the Guardians, and she has managed to track down 1 piece of the Key to Time. Her sister also has a piece, so that's 2 of the 6 accounted for. This is a trilogy. Now, as parts 2 and 3 both individually deal with the finding of a segment, part 1 has to deal with the collation of 4 pieces, and that's probably where the narrative is at its weakest. The writer is revealed on the commentary that he's recently been exposed to quite a lot of Flash Gordon, extremely fast-paced narrative, and that comes across in this story. And on my first listening, it was something I had some issues with. Perhaps that's because I was expecting 1 story per segment. I was unaware that it was a trilogy. But once I got used to the pacing of the story, it roared along and it was great. Here's its trailer.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions. Doctor Who. The Key to Time. The Judgment of Iskar.
The Key to Time is a perfect cube which maintains the equilibrium of time itself. When its 6 crystal segments are assembled, it can stop and start the universe. It can rewrite matter and change the states of quanta. It can restore balance.
We're right on top of the earthquakes! You need to fire into the gravity well. If you don't, it will tear us apart.
You are my prisoners. You will not destroy Mars.
Your doctor? He's screaming.
Stop it!
I'm not going to stop it.
Warriors, forward!
It's all unraveling. Doctor, the Ice Warriors are pushing forward. They just got bigger guns.
If one of you opens fire, I will snap the Doctor's neck.
Here, in this crystal, it's holding a black hole at bay. I can feel it pressing against the sides. Such a lot of power. And mine now.
You should have told me.
I didn't think you'd want to know.
That the Key to Time is collapsing, and with it the whole of the universe?
That it's your fault?
The Ice Warriors heard here are very, very good. For me, they demonstrate the larger universe that the Ice Warriors always had the potential to exist within. Halfway through the story, the narrative switches locations from Mars to a floating castle-like world, populated by insects. Again, I wasn't truly taken with the treatment, but perhaps that's more to do with my imagination. You see, when I'm listening to a Fifth Doctor story, in my head the effects are actually of the same standard and quality of the Fifth Doctor's time. Now that's probably a failing of mine, because everyone knows the pictures are better on audio and you can have anything you want, but I still specifically place it at that period of time, and my spaceships and my effects always look the same. And when there's an insect race, I don't cast them in a marvellous CGI done at the mill kind of a way. I have mine imagined and built by Matt Irvine and the rest of the effects department. Whether that's a good thing or not, that's just my own feeling. With an ending that reminds me more and more of The Hitchhiker's Guide the more I listen to it, I am very happy with this story, much more happy than on my first listening. And so would I recommend The Key to Time? Well, of course I would. Would you expect anything else? And so, I will bid you farewell and speak to you very, very soon when we'll be talking about The Rescue.
Planet Dido to rescue ship. Planet Dido to rescue ship. Come in, please.
Watch out for Kakulian. You destroyed a whole planet.
No, don't!
You're insane. Would you like adventure, my dear? I can promise you an abundance of it.
You must be Maximus Battalion from Corinth.
I want you looking special at the slave auction.
Gotta get away from here.
Caesar Nero, Emperor of all Rome.
Some sort of conspiracy going on. But what does it all mean?
By tonight, all Rome will be ablaze.
What does it all mean?
Caesar Nero, don't drink!
I had every reason to believe that drink is poison. He was right.
Be seeing you. You have been listening to the Tin Dog Podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Contact us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk.